The restaurant went quiet the second I set the folder down next to my mother's wine glass. Welcome to Revenge Story Official, where the quiet ones always have a plan. And justice never arrives late if you believe silence is the most powerful weapon. You are in the right place. Let's get into it. 20-2 years of silence and now a private dining room full of relatives, all of them holding their breath. My mother had just finished telling the table that I had abandoned the family, that I was hoarding my grandmother's money. My twin sister sat at the far end, too thin, not looking at anyone. My father's jaw was working like he was chewing something he couldn't swallow. I rested 2 fingers on the folder. I didn't open it yet. What I pulled out of that folder is the reason my parents haven't spoken to me since, but to understand how I ended up standing in that room, you have to go back to the night they decided one daughter was enough. My name is Charlotte. I am a large animal vet in Morrow Creek, Wisconsin. Population just under 4,000. Most of them dairy. I pull calves at 3 in the morning. I have had my arm inside a heifer up to the shoulder while she came sideways through a barn door. So when people ask if confrontation scares me, I have to laugh. Blood doesn't scare me. People who smile while they lie to you, that's different. My husband Sam welds and runs 40 acres we lease from the co-op. We have 2 kids. Mia is 7 and asks why constantly. Lee is 4 and thinks every dog in the county is his. We are not rich, we are rooted. I built this life with my own 2 hands and a borrowed truck, and I never once asked the people who raised me for the first 12 years to help. They wouldn't have anyway. You don't forget the night your parents give you away. I was 12, it was spring, and there was a suitcase by the front door that wasn't mine, except it was because my clothes were folded inside it. I remember the smell of pot roast. Nobody was eating. My mother sat me down at the kitchen table with a careful, soft voice. Charlotte, you're going to go stay with Uncle Raymond for a while. I held onto that word like a railing. My twin sister Whitney was upstairs with her tutor. She had won the state science fair that month. There were ribbons on the fridge and a new desk lamp for our room, and a feeling in that house that the future had finally arrived, and it had only enough room for one of us. I didn't cause trouble. I got good grades. I drew horses in the margins of my homework. I wasn't a problem child, I just wasn't a prodigy, and in that house those had become the same thing. Raymond's truck pulled into the driveway around 7. My mother walked me out with her hand light on my shoulder, afraid pressing harder would make it real. She kissed the top of my head. Be good for your uncle. Then she went back inside before the truck even backed out. Through the kitchen window I could see her lift the pot roast off the table and carry it to the trash, scraping the plates, getting on with the evening. A while turned into the rest of my childhood. Here is the math I need you to understand, because everything that happened later runs on it. My parents had twins, and they decided early that twins were a portfolio Whitney tested into the gifted program in 2nd grade. I didn't. From that day forward the resources flowed one direction. Whitney got the tutors, the math camps, the violin. I got hand-me-downs and a library card. Nobody was cruel about it. Exactly, that's what made it so hard to name. I heard my father say it once through the heating vent the year before they sent me away. My mother had asked quietly whether they were being fair to me. His answer came up through the metal ductwork, as clear as if he'd been standing in my room. We can only invest in one future. Linda, you spread it thin, you lose them both. I was 11. I lay on the floor with my ear to the vent and learned exactly what I was worth on a spreadsheet. I didn't tell anyone. I just got very quiet and very good at not needing things. Uncle Raymond was my father's older brother. He had left the city for the country, and my father considered that a failure of ambition. So when Raymond took me in, my parents got to tell themselves I had landed somewhere lesser, which made it easier to stop thinking about me at all. The farm was 40 minutes outside Morrow Creek. The first week I cried into a pillow that smelled like a stranger. Raymond and his wife Diane didn't push. Diane just kept setting a 3rd plate at dinner, like I had always been there. The 2nd week, Raymond knocked on my door before dawn and said, "Cow's catting, you can watch or you can sleep." I watched. I held a flashlight while a heifer strained, and Raymond talked her through it in a low voice, and when that wet impossible calf finally slid onto the straw and shook its head, something in my chest came loose that I didn't have a word for yet. Diane taught me that you feed people whether or not they have earned it. Raymond taught me that you show up at 3 in the morning for things that cannot speak for themselves. Neither of them ever once made me feel like overhead. I made myself a promise out behind the milk house. I swore I would never need my parents for anything ever again. I would build a life so solid they see. Didn't take a single brick of it. I kept that promise for 22 years. What I didn't plan for was the day they would come looking. 3 or 4 times a year, an envelope would show up at the farm addressed in a looping old-fashioned hand, inside a card and sometimes a folded $10 bill and a few lines that always ended the same way. Thinking of you, love, Grandma. My grandmother Eleanor was my father's mother, and somehow, against the whole tide of that family, she had decided not to forget me. She never said a bad word about my parents in those cards. She didn't have to. The fact of the cards said it for her. While my mother and father were busy pretending I had evaporated, Eleanor kept a string tied between us, one card at a time. When I got into vet school, she sent a card that just said, "Of course you did. I have it still." For a long time those cards were the only thread connecting me to the family I came from. I had no idea she was doing anything more than loving me from a distance. I had no idea she was watching, counting, keeping things in a wooden box, and I had no idea how little time was left to thank her. The good years deserve their own breath. I finished vet school with more debt than sense and came straight back to Morrow Creek because it was the only place that had ever felt like mine. I bought into old Doc Poots's practice when he retired, then bought him out entirely. I met Sam at a feed store when his truck wouldn't start and mine had cables. We married in Raymond's back pasture die and lived long and new. Could dance at that wedding, slow and careful. 3 months before the cancer took her. Then Mia, then Eli, and a life that on paper looked small and felt enormous. I had everything those people in Iowa had decided I wasn't worth the investment to give, and I never sent them a single update, not a graduation announcement, not a birth notice, not out of spite, out of survival. I had built a house with no doors facing their direction, and I liked it that way. Eleanor knew it all through her cards. The last one she sent at Christmas said, "You did the thing I prayed you do. You built something they can't ration." I didn't understand the word ration until later. Then one Tuesday in February, I was washing iodine off my hands at the clinic sink when my phone lit up with an Iowa number. Something made me wipe my hands and pick up. A pause on the line, a breath I hadn't heard into decades. "Charlotte, honey, it's your mother." I set the towel down very slowly. My mother does not call me honey. My mother does not call me at all. Whatever she wanted, it wasn't me. The same week, the care home called. Eleanor had had a stroke. If I wanted to see her while she could still see me, I should come now. I left the clinic with iodine still on my hands. Eleanor's room smelled like lavender lotion and floor cleaner. She was small in the bed, smaller than the last time, and the stroke had pulled one side of her face down, but her eyes found me and they sharpened. Her good hand lifted off the blanket toward me. I took it. "Charlie," she said, slow and bent, but it was my name, the one only she and Raymond ever used. "The box," she said, "wooden box at the house, things you need to know when I'm gone. Promise me you'll open it yourself. Don't let your father near it." I promised. She looked at me a long moment, and the working half of her mouth pulled into something that wanted to be a smile. "Good," she said, "now they can't ration you." There was that word again. I asked her what she meant. Her eyes had drifted toward the window. Her hand had gone loose in mine. 3 days later she was gone. The funeral was small, the way Eleanor wanted it. A handful of women from her old church, Raymond leaning on a cane, me and Sam. My parents didn't come. Whitney didn't come. They couldn't drive 3 hours to bury the woman who had raised my father. What surprised me was Aunt Pam, my mother's younger sister, 60 years old and built entirely out of opinions about other people's business. She showed up at the funeral home, dabbed at eyes that weren't wet, and within 10 minutes had steered me into a corner by the coffee urn. "Such a loss," she said. "Did Eleanor ever get her affairs in order? Because there was the house, and she was always careful with $1. Your mother just wonders who is handling all that as family." There it was. They hadn't come to mourn. They had sent a scout. I told Pam that the lawyer was handling it. I watched the word lawyer land on her like a drop plate. My grandmother wasn't even in the ground yet, and the family that had written me off had suddenly remembered my address. The lawyer's name was Marisol Vance. She had an office above a hardware store in Morrow Creek with a radiator that knocked like it had opinions. She had been Eleanor's attorney for 15 years. She slid a folder across the desk. "Your grandmother was specific," she said, "and she was organized. Eleanor had left me the bulk of her estate, her old house owned outright and rented for years, a savings account she had fed steadily for 2 decades. The total made my ears ring. It wasn't life-changing money to a banker, to a rural vet with school debt and 2 kids. It was a different sky, but Marisol wasn't done. She set to more things on the desk: a sealed letter, my name across the front in that looping hand, and a wooden box, the lid worn smooth. The exact box Eleanor had made me promise to open myself. She left instructions, Marisol said, and she added a clause. I will be frank, in 15 years I have drafted that clause maybe twice, a no contest provision. Anyone who challenges this will and loses forfeit. It's anything they might otherwise have received. Your grandmother seemed to expect a challenge. I asked from who. Marisol single quotes s expression didn't change. She didn't say it, but she told me to make it airtight, and she told me to make sure it went to you and only you. I drove home with a sealed letter on the passenger seat and did not open it yet. I wanted to be alone, the right kind of alone. When the Iowa number called again, I let it ring twice while I decided who I wanted to be on this call. Then I answered. My mother's voice poured out, warm as syrup and just as sticky. Charlotte, honey, I have been thinking about you so much. Life's too short, isn't it? We saw about your grandmother and it just put everything in perspective. Your father and I have regrets. We weren't perfect, but you're our daughter and we'd love to put the past behind us. We want to have a family dinner, everyone together, a fresh start. Will you come? Some animal part of me leaned toward that warmth. Before my brain caught up, then I heard it, the timing. My grandmother, 3 weeks dead, an estate freshly mine, and suddenly the perspective, suddenly the fresh start. People don't get sentimental on a schedule, they get sentimental on a deadline. I told her I'd think about it. She said she loved me before she hung up, for the first time in 22 years, and it landed on me like a coin tossed to a beggar. I went back to Eleanor's house. The wooden box was where Marisol's note said it would be, on the top shelf of the bedroom closet, wrapped in one of Eleanor's good scarves. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the letter first. My dear Charlie, if you're reading this, I'm gone and I'm finally able to tell you the things I held my tongue about for far too long. There was money meant for both of you girls. She wrote equally what they did with your half. You'll find in the box I got the records the honest way through the bank because I had a right to as a contributor. I'm not leaving you my house and my savings to make you rich, Charlie. I'm leaving them to you so that you will never, not once in your life, have to sit at their table and beg for a seat. You earned your seat the day you were born. They're the ones who forgot. Use the box if they make you, don't if they don't. Either way, you're free now. Stand up straight. Love, Grandma. Under the photographs in the box, the temperature changed. There were documents, bank statements, a manila envelope soft with handling, legal pages with a notary stamp. My grandmother, the woman who sent $10 bills and birthday cards, had been quietly assembling something for years. This wasn't sentiment, this was a case file. The bank statements told the story in plain columns. When Whitney and I were small, there had been an account opened in both our names, the Ingram Children's Education Fund. Contributions from relatives, from a great-aunt, and most of all, from Eleanor, meant to put 2 girls through college too. The statements showed steady deposits all the way until I was about 13. Then the withdrawals started, big ones: tuition payments, math camps, a violin, a private high school, then a private college. All of it flowing toward one name, Whitney's. My half of that fund, the half with my name on the account, the half meant to make me a vet without a decade of debt, had been drained to the cent by the time I was 17. I thought about the nights I had lain awake doing the math on vet school loans, the years Sam and I ate beans so we could make a payment. The way I had told myself it built character. There had been money, it had my name on it, and they had fed it dollar by dollar into the future they decided was worth funding. I didn't cry, I didn't throw anything. I lined the statements up in order. I noted the dates. I started, very quietly, to build a case. My grandmother had handed me the foundation of. They wanted a dinner. Fine, I would come to dinner, but I would come knowing exactly what was already mine and exactly what they had spent of it. I brought the box to Marisol 2 days later and watched her go through it with the focus of a surgeon. When she got to the manila envelope, she went very still. This isn't just unkind, Charlotte. This account had both girls as named beneficiaries, moving the entirety of one beneficiary's share to the other without consent, especially while you were a minor. That's not a family squabble. Depending on how it was structured, that could be actionable. I asked what that meant in plain terms. It means, she said, that if your parents are foolish enough to come after Eleanor's estate, they would be doing it while sitting on a much bigger problem of their own. You walked in here thinking you had a shield. You actually have a sword. To the question is whether you ever have to draw it. I told her I didn't want a war. I wanted to be left alone with my real family. Marisol gave me a long look over her glasses. Then I would suggest you make it very clear, very publicly, and very calmly that going to war with you is a losing move. People only respect the boundary they can see. The wall of. My phone buzzed on her desk. My mother texting, cheerful as anything. So glad you're coming Saturday the 14th, 6 p.m. The hollow brick room. The whole family will be there. Wear something nice. I looked at the message, then at the box, then at Marisol. She picked the stage. I said I'll bring the script. I didn't go to the dinner out of weakness. I want that on the record. I went because of where it was. The hollow brick room is a private dining room at the only nice restaurant in Morrow Creek, my town, not theirs. They were driving 3 hours into my territory to perform for an audience of aunts and uncles and cousins, the extended family my mother had spent decades managing the story for. That audience had only ever heard one version of me, the difficult daughter, the one who chose to leave, the ungrateful girl now sitting on grandma's money. If I stayed home, that version won by default. If I went, I had one night, one room, one table full of the only witnesses whose opinion my parents actually cared about. My mother's whole power came from controlling the story in front of those people, so I would tell the story in front of those people, with the documents on the table and a voice so calm they would have to lean in to hear me. That is the thing about people who shout. They cannot survive someone who doesn't. I spent that week building my folder, not a dramatic stack. Marisol had warned me against theater, just the essentials in order: the notarized guardianship transfer, the bank statements showing the drain fund, Eleanor's letter, a copy, the original locked in Marisol's safe. And then Marisol found one more thing that turned my folder from a shield into something with an edge. She had gone looking for the guardianship records. When a child goes to live with a relative long term, there is usually paperwork. She wanted to know what story the paper told. She slid a notarized copy across the desk. A voluntary transfer of guardianship. Dated the spring I was 12, signed by my mother and my father, granting custody of me to Raymond Ingram, not temporary, not emergency, voluntary and indefinite. Read the line at the bottom, Marisol said. In my father's blocky handwriting, in the section for reason. Parents unable to allocate adequate resources to both minors. They had put it in writing to a notary. The lie my mother had told Whitney, that I had chosen Raymond, that I liked it better there, was demolished by a single sentence my own parents had signed when I was a child. I hadn't chosen anything. They had filed me away like a form. I folded the notarized copies into my bag and felt, for the first time, that particular calm that settles over you when you are holding the truth and watching someone walk confidently toward the edge of it. Before that Saturday I drove out to the farm to see Raymond. He is 80 now, slower. His hands knotted from 60 years of cold mornings. I found him on the porch with a coffee, watching the light go down over the same pasture where Sam and I got married. I told him everything: the box, the fund, the dinner, the folder. He listened without interrupting, turning his mug slowly in his hands. When I finished he was quiet a long while, then he said, "Your dad and I stopped talking the year he sent you to me. He called to ask if I'd take you like you were a heifer he couldn't carry through winter, and I said yes before he finished the sentence, because I'd be damned if you'd go to strangers." He looked at me. "Best thing that ever happened to this farm was that man's worst day as a father." Then he said the thing I carried into that room: family isn't the people who can afford to keep you, Charlie, it's the people who never once did the math. I hugged him on that porch longer than either of us was comfortable with, and driving home in the dark I understood that whatever the folder did to my parents the next night, I had already won the only thing that ever mattered. I had been kept not by the people who made me, by the people who chose me. The folder was just for the record. The truth was already mine. The morning of the dinner I did my rounds like any other Saturday. A colic case at the Peterson place, a routine herd check, a barn cat with an abscess. The work steadied me the way it always has. By afternoon I was laying the folder out on the bed one last time. The guardianship transfer, my father's handwritten reason facing up the bank statements, my half draining into Whitney's tuition. Dates circled the certified bank letter confirming both beneficiaries. Eleanor's letter. I dressed. Plainly dark slacks. A sweater Diane had wear upon me years ago because I wanted her there in some thread of wool. Sam kissed me at the door and held Eli, who waved a fistful of crayon at me. Mia hugged my legs and told me to be brave, which broke and rebuilt me in the same second. Then I drove 10 minutes into town toward the room where they thought they had cornered me. I was almost to the restaurant when my phone buzzed in the cup holder. A family group text I had been added to days earlier. My mother had just sent a message, and she had sent it to the wrong thread. It landed in the big family group, all 30 of us including me. Once she signs Grandma share over to Whitney tonight, we put all this behind us. Don't let her leave without the agreement. Be warm but firm. I read it twice at a red light. There it was, the whole loving reconciliation, the perspective, the fresh start, all of it reduced to a tactical instruction. Get the signature, be warm but firm. I screenshotted it before she could delete it. Sure enough, a minute later the message vanished from the thread. This message was deleted, followed by a flustered sorry, wrong chat, and a little laughing emoji as if a joke had misfired. But you cannot unsend what 30 people already saw, and you definitely cannot unsend what I had already saved. I sat at the green light until the car behind me honked. Then I pulled into the restaurant lot and turned off the engine. My mother had just handed me the motive in writing, time-stamped, in front of the exact audience she had spent decades performing for. I sat there 1 full minute, then I picked up the bag, walked across the gravel, and pushed open the door of the hollow brick room. The room was warm and low-lit. A long table set for 15 under a brass chandelier, the smell of garlic and bread, the clink of someone's ice water. They were all there. My mother at the head in pearls, mid-laugh, performing host, my father beside her, grayer and heavier than I remembered, Pam, sharp-eyed, already watching the door. A scatter of aunts and uncles and cousins, and at the far end, small and pale, Whitney. She met my eyes for 1 second and then looked at her plate. My mother saw me and lit up like a stage. Charlotte, oh honey, you came. She crossed the room and hugged me, and I let her, arms loose at my sides. The way you let weather happen. She smelled like the same perfume from 22 years ago. Over her shoulder I could see the whole table watching, measuring the script already running in their heads. The cold, ungrateful daughter finally come to be guilted into doing right by family. I let my mother seat me. I let the warmth roll over me. I put my bag on the floor by my chair, the folder inside it, and I rested my hand on the white tablecloth and waited, because Raymond taught me something else too. A long time ago in a barn at 3 in the morning, you don't rush a hard birth, you wait for the moment the body is ready, then you pull once clean, all the way through. Dinner came in courses, and so did the performance. My mother ran the table like a woman who had waited decades for this audience. She toasted family found again. She told a soft edited story about how hard these years had been with Charlotte, so far away, so hard to reach, shaping the room before she ever got near the ask. People nodded. Pam dabbed her eyes on cue. I ate my soup and said little, which they read as guilt, exactly as planned. Then over the entree my mother turned the warmth up and began to land it. You know, she said to the table, but really to me, Whitney has been through such a terrible time, and here we all are, blessed, especially some of us. A glance at me. Grandma Eleanor, bless her, wasn't quite herself at the end. She made some decisions that weren't really fair to everyone, but we can fix that as a family tonight. There it was, the turn toward the agreement. My father set down his fork. It's the decent thing. Charlotte, share what you were given, make it right. The whole table swung toward me. 15 faces, most of them already certain I would refuse and prove I was exactly the cold creature Pam had described. My mother reached over and patted my hand. We're not asking for much, honey, just for you to do right by your sister, to sign a little something tonight so we can all move forward. She had a paper folded by her plate, a pen. She had brought her own document to my town, to my room, certain I would cave under the weight of all those watching eyes. I looked at the paper. Then I asked her calmly, why did she think Eleanor's will was unfair? That was all the invitation she needed. My mother's face shifted into the wounded saint expression I remembered from childhood. She addressed the table like a woman testifying. Because that girl, she said, her voice catching with practiced emotion, she left this family when she was young. She chose to. We tried. We begged, and she turned her back on us, and then when her grandmother was old and confused, she swept in and made sure she got everything while her own sister has nothing. This family deserves the truth. She said the word truth at my table, to my witnesses. 3 feet from the folder that held it, I let the silence stretch 1 beat to let them all watch me. Then I lifted the folder out of my bag and set it down on the white tablecloth right next to my mother's wine glass. You're right, I said quietly, this family does deserve the truth, so let's start with mine. I took out the first page. This is a guardianship transfer dated the spring I was 12, signed by both my parents. It gives custody of me to Uncle Raymond. It is not temporary. There is a line on it for the reason. I looked at my father. Would you like to read what you wrote? Or should I read it slow and clear into the silence? Parents unable to allocate adequate resources to both minors. I let that land. I didn't choose to leave, I said to the table. To every face that had been told otherwise, I was 12 years old. My parents signed me over because they decided they could only afford one daughter and her. Iding to a notary. And Uncle picked up the page. His eyebrows climbed. He passed it down. My mother's smile had frozen into something brittle that's taken out of context. We were struggling. You don't understand the pressure. I understand it perfectly. You explained the philosophy to Whitney. You told her I chose to stay away, that I didn't want to be part of this family. I turned to my sister. Whitney, did she tell you that? The whole table turned to Whitney. She had gone white as the tablecloth, her hands gripping the edge. My mother shot her a look that could have stripped paint, a look that used to end every argument in that house. But Whitney wasn't 12 anymore either, and I could see in the way her chin came up that something 22 years in the making was about to give way. The guardianship paper made its way around the table, hand to hand, and the room's certainty about me began quietly to come apart. I took out the second set of pages. There's more. This is the Ingram Children's Education Fund, opened when Whitney and I were little. Both our names on the account, money from relatives, from a great aunt, and most of all from Grandma Lenore. Meant to put 2 girls through college too. I laid the statements out, deposits and then withdrawals, dates circled in my own hand. These are the deposits, steady for years, and these, I moved my finger to the second column, are the withdrawals starting the year after they sent me away. My half of this fund, the half, with my name on it, was emptied to the cent by the time I was 17. Every dollar went to Whitney's tutors, her private school, her college. My voice stayed level. I paid for vet school with a decade of loans and years of eating beans, while there was money set aside for me that my parents spent on the daughter they kept. They didn't just give me away. I looked at my mother, then my father. You didn't lose me, you spent me. The room went dead silent, and then my father, God help him, did the thing that finished it. He couldn't stand to be accused without defending the logic he had lived by. We did what any responsible parent would do, he said, loud and indignant to the whole table. You don't waste resources on a long shot. We can only invest in one future. It came out of him exactly the way it had come up through the heating vent when I was 11. Only. Now there were 15 witnesses and a guardianship paper going around the table, and bank statements lined up on the cloth. He had just confessed, proudly, to all of it, in front of the only people whose good opinion he and my mother had ever cared about. An aunt put her hand over her mouth. A cousin set down the statement like it had burned her. My mother hissed his name. Too late. He had authenticated everything I had said in his own voice, for free. That was when Pam tried to save the ship. She stood halfway up, voice shrill. This is ridiculous. Charlotte came in here and poisoned her grandmother against her own son's family, and now she is putting on a show. We all know what really happened. So I took out my phone. Aunt Pam, you keep saying I came here in bad faith. Let me show everyone he came here in bad faith. I turned the screen to the table and read aloud my mother's own words from the group thread. Once she signs Grandma's share over to Whitney tonight, we put all this behind us. Don't let her leave without the agreement. Be warm but firm. I looked up. My mother sent that to all of us by accident an hour ago, then deleted it. This whole dinner was not a reconciliation. It was a plan to get my signature before the state settles on Tuesday. I passed the phone to the nearest cousin, who read it, went pale, and passed it on. Pam's mouth opened and closed. The cousin she had called 2 days ago looked at her and said quietly, "You told me she wept in for the money, but this says you all planned this." Pam had no answer. The whisper campaign she had built collapsed under a single screenshot in front of the very people she had whispered to. She sat back down hard. And at the far end of the table, slowly, Whitney rose to her feet. She was shaking, both hands flat on the table to hold herself up. My mother said her name low, warning the voice that had ended every rebellion in that house for 30 years. "Whitney, sit down, this is not the time." But Whitney looked at her. And then she looked at me, and then she spoke to the whole table in a voice that cracked but did not stop. "When we were 12, she said, I asked Mom where Charlotte went, why she never came home, why she didn't even visit. Mom set me down and told me that Charlotte chose to leave, that she was happier with Unc Raymond, that she didn't want to be part of our family, that some people are just like that and I shouldn't take it personally." Tears ran down her face, but her voice got stronger. "I believed her for 22 years. I believed my sister abandoned me. I grew up thinking Charlotte didn't love us." She gestured at the papers on the table. "And the whole time they gave her away, they spent her college money on me, and they let me hate her for it, so I'd never ask the hard questions." She turned to our mother. "You didn't just throw her out, you made me believe it was her fault. You stole my sister from me and told me she left. And our mother broke. The mask came all the way off. She shot up out of her chair, pearls trembling, and the careful host voice was gone, replaced by something raw and ugly the whole table finally got to see. "After everything I sacrificed for this family," she shrieked, "I gave up my entire future. Do you have any idea what I gave up, you ungrateful, both of you?" She was screaming now, red-faced, in front of the aunts and cousins she had performed for her entire life. And I sat perfectly still, hands folded on the white cloth, and let them all watch the woman who had called me cold finally show the room who had been cold all along. When my mother finally ran out of breath, the room was so quiet you could hear the chandelier hum. I stood up unhurried. I gathered my papers back into the folder one at a time. I did not gloat. Raymond taught me, you don't dance on a downed animal. I'm going to say this once and then I'm going to go home to my children. I'm not signing anything. Grandma Lenore's will is valid. It was made with a clear mind and it is documented on Tuesday. It settles. And it settles to me. I looked at my father. The education fund is a separate matter. My lawyer has the records. What happens with that will be decided properly, not over dinner. You moved money out of an account with my name on it while I was a child. You may want to talk to your own attorney before you talk to me again. His face had gone the color of ash. As for the rest of you, I said to the table gently, because most of them were just people who had been told a story, you have been lied to for 22 years. I don't hold that against you. I hold it against the 2 people who told the lie. I picked up the folder. Mom, you spent my whole childhood managing what this family believed about me. Tonight you can't manage it anymore. That's not my revenge. That's just what's left when the lie runs out. I turned toward the end of the table, toward Whitney. We stood looking at each other across the wreckage of that table to faces that used to be one. I took one of Marisol's cards out of my pocket. I had brought it on purpose. I walked down the length of the table and put it in her hand. That's my lawyer, I said, not for this state, for you if you need to get out of their basement and stand on your own feet. Whitney looked at the card, then at me. I'm so sorry, Charlie, for all of it. I told her she didn't owe me an apology for being a child who got lied to. Then I said the thing I had decided on the drive over the boundary and the door, both at once. When you're ready to stand on your own. Not on theirs, not on mine. Call me as a sister, not as a bank, not as a rescue. A sister, I'd like that, but I need you steady first. I've spent enough of my life being someone's overhead. I won't make you mine. She nodded, clutching the card like the first solid thing she had held in years. I squeezed her shoulder once, then I picked up my bag, said a quiet good night to the room full of stunned faces, and walked out of the hollow brick room into the cold, clean dark of my own town. I didn't look back. The state settled that Tuesday, exactly as Eleanor had billed it to my parents' lawyer. Once he heard about the bank statements and the guardianship paper, quietly withdrew the intent to contest Eleanor's house and savings passed into my name. Clean and final. My mother tried for a few weeks to keep the story alive online. Almost no one engaged the relatives who had been in That room had seen the documents and heard my father announce his philosophy out loud: you cannot whisper a story to people who have already watched the truth happen. My parents later sent a formal letter through their attorney informing me I had been removed as a beneficiary of their estate. I read it standing at my mailbox. And I want to tell you exactly what I felt because it surprised me. Relief. They had taken back something that had never really been mine, a place in a family that had only ever measured me. I signed the acknowledgement they had enclosed without a flicker of hesitation. Some people would have been hurt by that letter. The 12-year-old in the truck mig. HD have been, but I wasn't 12 anymore, and I had already inherited the only thing from that family that ever mattered. The certainty that I had survived them and built something they couldn't ration. I mailed the form back the next morning, dropped it in the same blue box where Eleanor's cards used to arrive, and drove to the clinic where a farmer was waiting with a sick heifer and absolutely no opinion about whether I was smart enough to be worth keeping. It was the best Monday I had had in years. Whitney called in the spring, not for money. She had used Marisol's referral, found work, moved out of the basement into a small place 2 states away. I'm standing on my own feet, she said. You said to call when I was, so I'm calling. We talked for an hour, 2 sisters learning each other from scratch, carefully. The way you'd approach an animal that has been hurt. She came out to the farm in June. Watched my kids tear across the same pasture where Raymond first handed me a flashlight in a cold barn. She cried, a little, the good kind. Eleanor's old house is ours now, rented to a young family who keep chickens and wave when I drive by. Sometimes I park outside it and just look, and I thank the woman who spent her last years quietly building me a shield out of bank statements and love. She gave me the one thing they never would. She gave me proof, and with it, peace. Here is what 22 years and 1 folder taught me. Family isn't the people who can afford to keep you, it's the people who never once did the math. If you have ever been told you were the one they could manage without, the spare, the overhead, the long shot not worth the investment, you weren't. They were just bad at counting what mattered. If you are watching this right now, tell me in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. That is my story, and I will see you on Revenge Story Official, where silence is power and the truth always finds its moment.